PBS did a fascinating experiment that should scare the hell out of you. And it showed how easily brains can be hacked. Could you give somebody information that's unambiguously just true, and it instantly changes their voting preferences? Yup, because they did it. They did it. They instantly changed people's voting preferences. Instantly meaning, in a few hours. They changed people's voting preferences. They can actually keep the votes the way they were originally, left-leaning, simply by the way they described a fact. If they described it just objectively, people were scared to death, and they voted accordingly. And if they fixed the data by couching it and, don't worry about this, there's nothing to worry about, their votes didn't change. PBS did a fascinating experiment that should scare the hell out of you. And it showed how easily brains can be hacked. And I think it was Hacking Your Mind was the name of the special. And so what PBS did was they primed people before asking them for their voting preferences. And the way they primed them was half of the people got just generic information that had no emotional content. And then they said, all right, who do you vote for? Then they give them some dry, unemotional information. And then they check later and they say, okay, now who do you vote for? And what topics do you favor now? The people who just got dry, boring information had the same opinion afterwards as they had before. So you might ask yourself, what kind of information could you give somebody that would fairly instantly change their voting preferences? Is that such a thing? And if there was such a thing, would it be true? In other words, could you give somebody information that's unambiguously just true, and it instantly changes their voting preferences? Yup, because they did it. They did it. They instantly changed people's voting preferences. Instantly meaning, in a few hours. They changed people's voting preferences. Here's the information they gave them. They had only white voters, so they started with just a white group of voters, and they gave them the information that white people were becoming a minority in the United States, which is, factually true in the sense that the population of white people is dipping below 50% of the total population. Having primed a bunch of people who were voting sort of left-leaning ways, people who were, let's say, against the wall. Once they were told that their group was, the implication is threatened, because, your power is going to be decreased, because now you're going to be under 50% and shrinking. As soon as white people were told that their power was decreasing, their numbers were no longer a majority, they voted conservative. Suddenly, they wanted a wall. Suddenly, they voted for a whole range of conservative things that 2 hours earlier they wouldn't have voted for. Instant change. Now remember, I've told you that persuasion is not all equal. There are some things far more persuasive than other things. Facts are usually not persuasive, but fear is. Fear is persuasive. In fact, nothing is more persuasive than fear. So the way the information was presented to these groups of white people in the experiment was that there was something to be afraid of. And I believe they tried to see if they could soften it by just changing the way they described the same set of facts. So if they described the set of facts of, hey, white people are becoming a minority, but if they softened it and said, but it won't make any difference to your life, because what matters is education level, and the non-white population is far more educated than it's ever been before and improving every day. They've got good jobs. Everything's going to be great. Melting pot, we're good. So they can actually keep the votes the way they were originally, left-leaning, simply by the way they described a fact. If they described it just objectively, people were scared to death, and they voted accordingly. And if they fixed the data by couching it and, don't worry about this, there's nothing to worry about, their votes didn't change. Somebody says, as a master persuader, you are not surprised. No, I was not surprised that a fear that is this direct would have an impact. I was a little surprised, although I shouldn't have been, because the book Pre-suasion says this pretty much exactly, that the entire range of conservative opinions changed. Things that had nothing to do with being, white or not white, even those things ended up being influenced. So that was even more dramatic than I would have expected, I think, even though the science suggests that that would be the case.